When we think about the GMT watch, most often we think about Swiss brands. And I think that's because of the impact that Rolex has had on this industry. The 1950s Pan Am collaboration and the creation of the Pepsi GMT firmly established Rolex and the GMT complication in a very consumer-friendly package. And ever since then, we've seen so much development in this field. We've seen so many other brands experimenting with designs, with styles. But the typical GMT format that we know and love today belongs to Rolex, and it's quite an amazing feat to think that they pioneered those small nuances that have created such an iconic style. Now, naturally, we have seen this GMT complication shared across all manufacturers at all price ranges. The designs all seem fairly typical, fairly derivative, but I will argue that I believe Grand Seiko creates some of the most interesting, dynamic, and beautiful GMTs in the world. And it's partly because of an obsession I've had with one watch that this video exists, and I want this to be a time where I can sit back, talk about their designs, the amazing variety on offer, and hopefully take my mind off the watch that I've been obsessing about over 2 years. And before we get started, on the wrist today is the Omega 1957 Seamaster on an OEM Omega mesh bracelet. I've spent a lot of time doing a comprehensive video around the bracelet and my feelings around how it's changed the wearing experience and made this watch infinitely more wearable, and just this watch feels far more linked to the 1950s now. And I can't see myself ever going back to wearing this watch on its original bracelet. Maybe that'll change in time. And I think partly the reason why I am so attracted to the GMTs from Grand Seiko is because they share a lot of design characteristics very closely linked to Omega and the way they approach their products. So I would say the first watch that really made an impact a few years back was the Grand Seiko High Beat. That's the 36,000 beat movement, the Peacock GMT. This is an absolutely beautiful watch, highly sought after today. And it was the impression that this watch left of being something that obviously presented itself as a Grand Seiko, but had that gorgeous dynamic dial. You know, everything from the size to the finishing of this watch, its presence, it had everything that you wanted out of a daily wearing GMT. There were so many minute details about this watch that made it work. But then in stark contrast to the bracelet sports watch, completely different genre, the SBGM221 and its predecessors, they show us more of a 1940s, 1950s inspiration of a classic dress watch, with just an excellent use of applied elements with numbers on its dial. You know, a cream dial instead of something white, which doesn't look so visually enhanced. It's far more subtle and simpler. And for those who are looking for a more affordable option of a GMT, looking to the 9F quartz movement that Grand Seiko offers, the most accurate quartz movement in the world, giving you all the traits of Grand Seiko design with amazing technology to back it up. Over the years, just using these three models as examples, you can see how widespread the selections are. Of course, through all this time, my interest has peaked, not only because their designs are different and special, but because they focus not just about changing colors like most brands do. They go to the nth degree when it comes to changing how their dials are going to be presented, the kinds of textures they approach, a focus on more naturalistic inspirations like tree bark, like snow, like clouds. It's a designer's dream to have that kind of brochure and catalog presented to you. And in 2020, the watch that really caught my eye, it still does because I know the reference off by heart, the SBGE257. This olive green dial, green ceramic bezel, spring drive GMT, presents itself as everything I would want out of a GMT watch. And what interested me most about this watch, as collectors, I find this fascinating. We don't only focus on the watch and what it possesses, all of its details, but we also think about how it's going to factor in and be a part of a small collection. And you think about the color, you think about the complication, you think about the brand, you think about the size and how it's going to wear. Maybe you think about the materials of the piece, maybe you think about the occasions when you would wear it. And when I look at my core collection and the two heavy hitters, the Seamaster 1957 and the Tudor FXD, a matte dial, black, classic inspiration dive watch next to a navy blue titanium modern incarnation of a dive watch, this dark olive green GMT spring drive Grand Seiko would make for such an interesting trifecta. So maybe I'm thinking about the collection as a whole and how this watch would factor in and less about the watch individually, but I also think that this SBGE perfectly epitomizes what Grand Seiko attempts to do with their sports GMT collection. Their designs, they marry that function and elegance with more of an emphasis on elegance so nicely together. The result is you're clearly wearing a Seiko-inspired design, this one with spring drive, but you get my point. And if we look further into this collection at, say, the Mist Flake GMT, completely titanium, something that comes across as more of a mishmash between Christopher Ward and Rolex and the Explorer 2. but it has integrated crown guards and a framing around the date window, and a handset that has a strong relationship, even down to the application of the batons and hands applied but fully polished, with a great amount of lume added. The minutiae and the detail that goes into every part of these watches is commendable, and we haven't even talked about the case finishing. And as we move further up the categories and we look to the high beats like the SBGJ237, a watch that has quite a common presentation of the typical GMT but with a sapphire capped insert, an offset crown and date window that's framed. And all the while this piece isn't losing its identity of being a Grand Seiko. This collection, whether all the way at the beginning at 9F Quartz, which is by no means entry level, it's Grand Seiko Quartz, it's a different ballgame, all the way up to the more sophisticated high beat and spring drive movements, the entire collection is infinitely fascinating because Grand Seiko continually asks what if. They question the status quo about sizes, about color configurations, and typically about how the GMT complication could be best implemented in the Elegance collection as well as a part of their sports line. They don't shy away from approaching these watches with matte dials, with sunburst finishes, or even as far up as highly textured, inspired by nature dials. The case sizes and styles change, the bracelets change. And even though they are so diverse, so spread apart, the fundamental thing which is great is that there's no one watch that feels out of place. Think of this as cruel irony. As I've talked about these watches more and I've fallen down the rabbit hole further, I don't think this obsession is going to stop. And I would hope that in this short video you have noticed just how nuanced this series is. And how I have felt for a very long time that frankly Grand Seiko GMTs seem to kick their competition in the teeth, creatively speaking. And if I was on the hunt for a Grand Seiko right now, and this is obviously going to be a drive for me in the future, the GMT collection would be my first stop. Frankly, it's very hard to speak more highly about these watches because you can see the passion and the love and the care that goes into these designs. Clear as day, a minimalist, typical Japanese, classic approach, married with technologically advanced components on the outside and the inside, gives you what I would argue to be some of the best GMT watches in the world, some of the most best designed watches in the world. Grand Seiko GMT. What more needs to be said? No kidding when I say that I've been obsessed with this watch for the last 2 years. SBGE, olive dial. Infinitely fascinating watch because of how it presents itself as a tool, but has so much elegance as well. I honestly think that Grand Seiko GMTs deserve far more credit than they are given, and their designs should be celebrated. And talking about this watch hasn't made the obsession go away at all. Grand Seiko GMT is in the pipeline for me, I think. I know everyone talks so highly about the snowflake and the spring drives and the cherry blossoms, just a standard date and time complication, but the way that they do their GMTs, it's something else. And given that choice, that's where I'll put my money anyway. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one.